idea of, if somebody believes they're not racist, okay, that's like, it's not anybody's job to force them to figure that out. You could look at that point on itself and say, are we okay with that? Like, are we then tolerant of racism in some way? And is that problematic? And I don't want to end the thread on that point, because I understand the nuance in which you're saying it.
Sure.
You're not saying it like, oh, I don't care if somebody's racist. I don't care if they do bad things.
Right.
You're saying it much more from like for lack of a better word, like an efficiency perspective. We're trying to address the problem. Although that might feel good, it may feel justified to call that person racist, to call them out very directly. It's not actually going to reduce racism in the world. And that has to be the goal, right? We're trying to reduce racism. So
Right.
the most effective approach towards that is maybe a different approach, which says, let's kind of, I don't know what the right approach is, like customize the approach, ease our way into it, get them to start to realize and figure it out. It makes me go back to where we were before, though. Like, if the root of racism is inherent in our human nature, which is it's really rooted in this selfishness or whatever we want to call it, it makes me wonder, like, where's the reason for optimism that this is going to work at large, right? Like,
Right.
how do we think human nature is fundamentally going to shift, right? Because and you could look throughout history. I know, in the last 400 or 500 years, whatever, racism in the way that we've known it in America is a very relevant thing to us, and it's disgusting and it's horrible, and there's been disgusting, horrible things done. But if you look at throughout human history, there's been disgusting, horrible human things done to women, to different groups, right? All different ways.
Right.
So where does the optimism come for you? And I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be there. I'm genuinely asking that if you take the approach, if some of the things you've figured out for yourself, if we employ those, it will help reduce racism. What's the source of that optimism? Why aren't you more cynical and say humans are just screwed? We're just bad.
I do think that a lot.
Me too.
So, it's if you watch the news, it's hard not to take on that, the world is just going to crap perspective. And overall, I'm a fairly pessimistic person. So for me, this was a big turning point, because when I made the realization that I had some garbage in my brain that wasn't helping me to be the person I wanted to be, I began my racial bias deconstruction and with my therapist, and also a lot of work on my own. And I was sharing it on TikTok, which was a recklessly brave thing to do, because it got a lot of interesting conversations going. But this is not a short media format that can explore these topics. So I stopped doing that after a while, and began to focus more on trying to put all of these complex pieces together. And that's why I appreciate a long interview format like this, to try and help that out. The optimism comes from the idea of not so much as fixing a situation as to make a tiny improvement. So I was also going through some career exercises, all those different career exercises where it says, write your own obituary. What do you want on your tombstone? Or if it were to be so bold as to say, if you were to be famous, what would you be famous for? Write an essay about that. I turned that around, and this is where I guess my optimism comes from. If you were to be forgotten within a generation or two, and you could move one aspect of the world just a tiny bit, what cause would you choose? And for me, it's racial bias deconstruction, helping people consider the possibility there's something going on in their subconscious, and there's an opportunity to get a little bit better. Will I be forgotten in a generation? Probably.
Yeah, we probably all will be. Yeah.
Not all of us can have a musical written about us and become, Hamilton. So that's not most of us. In fact, how much did I know about Hamilton before Hamilton? Not much.
Fair question. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm planning on being forgotten. I'm hoping that I can share this idea wide enough to where, to use a sports metaphor, somebody else can pick up the ball and take it to the first down. So.
And another provocative question, because that's the nature of this show.
Sure.
Why? I asked it in the beginning, but let me ask it in a different form now. You said if I could pick one thing, as you just laid out, really interesting scenario to lay out. I think it makes people think. Why race? Like, there's a lot of horrible things in the world. Why somebody, again, cynical, would come and say, well, given the times, you're a white male. It's a tough time. Some people would say it's a tough time to be a white male, which is a statement in and of itself. But like, you're just trying to jump on that train, right? You're trying to ease your own guilt. You're trying
Right.
to virtue signal that you're a good person. You're kind of just latching onto this thing because it's what the media is talking about.
Right.
What is your genuine reason for saying that's the most important issue to me? Racism.
It's because when you live in a self-imposed prison for so long, and that was by that prison I mean my own defensiveness, and I shouldn't use the word defensiveness because that makes people defensive. So if I were, so my subconscious mind is trying to protect me and my identity as a good person. Now, when I was going through therapy, I gave that protector a name. So, back to Carl Jung, he's big on the inner child. I had an inner child protector. I named him Kevin after the movie series Home Alone because he had all of these elaborate booby traps to protect my identity as a good person. And Kevin was working overtime to make me certain that I was a good person, regardless of my own behavior, regardless of my own beliefs. And it's really amazing the defensive systems or protective systems that a person can develop within the subconscious. And I've got journals full
I
of
can
notes
imagine.
on that topic. So yeah, that's where it came from for me, because when I finally realized that it wasn't immediate, I had to do some processing, but it was very liberating to realize, you know what? I have racial bias in my brain. It's not my fault that it got there. It's not my parents' fault that it got there, because my mom was very much pro civil rights, but she was also a fearful white woman. So when we drove down into downtown St. Louis for dentist appointments and whatnot, and driving through the streets, she would say, "Lock your doors," when she would see a black man on the sidewalk. Like, we're driving 30 miles an hour. I'm pretty sure he's not going to catch up to us. But she's still saying, "Lock her doors." In fact, not too long ago, I had an experience where I'm at a stoplight downtown. My left hand reaches up for my right shoulder, and as if to lock the door on the passenger side of the car, even though I'm in the driver's side. That involuntary motion, I could have easily dismissed it, but I looked at it and I said, "What is my hand doing?" It was really weird. And then I looked, and there's a black man on the sidewalk. Not a threatening looking guy, not a thug, just a guy crossing the street. No reason to be fearful at all, but that programming from my childhood 40 plus years ago, it had an effect. So that,
So that's
a whole
interesting.
nother
So
therapy session.
whole other therapy session. So there's so many directions to go from here. So let me go here first. And I say this, let me first say this. I think your honesty, your openness, and by that I don't just mean saying what you know to be true and what some people might be embarrassed by or ashamed by or just being honest. Your
I'm not
openness.
proud.
Well, exactly, and that's
This is,
a beautiful thing.
it's
But
it's
also
something
the
that needs to be talked
openness.
about, though.
Well, yeah, but also the openness of what you don't know, and like, hey, I'm sure I still have stuff in there that's going on, because that's
Oh
a
yeah.
tough thing just to acknowledge that, right? So I want to start by saying that, like, I think that's such a beautiful thing, and this is the stuff that has to be done. It makes me think, as you're saying that answer, though, and again, I don't say this in a bad way. That answer is rooted in a little bit of that, like, it was liberating for you to figure this out, and that's,
Absolutely.
again, you're still
Selfish.
miles ahead of most people, and I think that's just human nature. That's what makes me think this thing is so tough and interesting to work through, because in an ideal world, and I am no better than you, none of us, I don't believe, are better than anybody in
Sure.
this regard. The reason to want to get rid of racism is you don't want anybody to have to suffer. Nobody should have to suffer ever, right? A black child, a black adult, whoever, nobody, a white one, it doesn't matter. But obviously, black people have suffered a lot. But I feel like as humans, it's very difficult for us to be honest and say, the reason I'm going to do this unbelievably hard thing, like try and address my subconscious biases and work through this stuff and reprogram myself, which is, you've talked about therapy, journaling, all the work it does. It is very hard for us, sadly, to do that work completely for somebody else. And the reality is it has to benefit us in some way, right? And that's kind of comes through a little bit in that response. Again, not in a bad way, but it gets me back to that of wondering, like, is that even the solution to this has to be rooted in selfishness in some ways, which strangely starts to make you think, like, again, is it ever going to happen that if it's always selfishness at the root of it, how do we figure this out?